What's up, guys? I have a small surprise for you tonight. We got a guest speaker to come in for the Screwtape Letters reading, and it is Screwtape. Very excited. If you're joining us for the first time, my name is Joe Barnowski, and I am the high school youth director here at Light of the World Church in Fort Worth, and we are just having a blast going through reading the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis, a series of letters written from a senior demon to his nephew, a junior demon, who has been given his first human to torment and to tempt away from living a decent Christian life. So we see in these letters the strategies that the enemy uses to trip us up, and by being aware of them, we know how to avoid them. So, when Screwtape begins reading his letters here in just a moment, remember that they are written from the perspective of the demon. Therefore, when you hear references to our Father, we're talking about Satan. And when you hear references to our enemy or our adversary or the enemy, you're actually discussing God. Because, again, to the demons, that's the problem. So, without further ado, Screwtape. I've been thinking very hard about the question in your last letter. If, as I have clearly shown, all selves are by their very nature in competition, and therefore the enemy's idea of love is a contradiction in terms, what becomes of my reiterated warning that he really loves the human vermin and really desires their freedom and continued existence? The truth is, I slipped by mere carelessness into saying that the enemy really loves the humans. That, of course, is an impossibility. He is one being. They are distinct from him. Their good cannot be his. All his talk about love must be a disguise for something else. He must have some real motive for creating them and taking so much trouble about them. The reason one comes to talk as if he really had this impossible love is our utter failure to out that real motive. What does he stand to make out of them? That is the insoluble question. I do not see that it can do any harm to tell you that this very problem was a chief cause of our father's quarrel with the enemy. When the creation of man was first mooted, and when even at that stage the enemy freely confessed that he foresaw a certain episode about to cross, our father very naturally sought an interview and asked for an explanation. The enemy gave no reply, except to produce the cock-and-bull story about disinterested love, which he's been circulating ever since. This our father naturally could not accept. He implored the enemy to lay his cards on the table and gave him every opportunity. He admitted that he felt a real anxiety to know the secret, that the enemy replied simply with, "I wish with all my heart you did." It was, I imagine, at this stage of the interview that our father's disgust at such an unprovoked lack of confidence caused him to remove himself an infinite distance from the presence, with a suddenness that has given rise to the ridiculous enemy's story that he was forcibly thrown out of heaven. Since then, we've begun to see why our oppressor was so secretive. His throne depends on the secret. Members of his faction have frequently admitted that if we ever came to understand what he means by love, the war would be over and we should re-enter heaven. And there lies the great task. We know he cannot really love. Nobody can. It doesn't make sense. If we could only find out what he's really up to. Hypothesis after hypothesis has been tried, and we still can't find out. Yet we must never lose hope. More and more complicated theories, fuller and fuller collections of data, richer rewards for researchers who make progress, and more terrible punishments for those who fail. All this, pursued and accelerated to the very end of time, surely cannot fail to succeed. You complain that my last letter does not make it clear whether I regard being in love as a desirable state for a human or not. But really, Wormwood, that is the sort of question one expects them to ask. Leave the humans to discuss whether love, or patriotism, or celibacy, or candles on altars, or teetotalism, or education are either good or bad. Can't you see there's no answer? Nothing matters at all except the tendency of a given state of mind in given circumstances to move a particular patient at a particular moment either nearer to the enemy or nearer to us. Thus, it would be quite a good thing to make the patient decide that love is either good or bad. If he's an arrogant man with contempt for the body really based on delicacy, but mistaken by him for purity, and one who takes pleasure in flouting what most of his fellows approve, by all means let him decide against love. Instill in him an overweening asceticism, and then, when you've separated his sensuality from all that might humanize it, weigh in on him with it some more brutal and cynical form. If, on the other hand, he is an emotional, gullible man, feed him on minor poets and fifth-rate novelists of the old school until you have made him believe that love is both irresistible and somehow intrinsically meritorious. This belief is not much help, I grant you, in producing casual unchastity, but it is incomparable recipes for prolonged, noble, romantic, tragic adulteries, ending, if all goes well, in murders and suicides. Failing that, it can be used to steer the patient into a useful marriage. For marriage, though it is the enemy's invention, has its uses for us. There must be several young women in your patient's neighborhood who would render the Christian life intensely difficult to him if only you could persuade him to marry one of them. Please send a report on this when next you write. In the meantime, get it quite clear in your own mind that this state of falling in love is not in itself necessarily favorable to us or to the other side. It is simply an occasion which both we and the enemy are trying to exploit. Like most of the other things which humans are excited about, such as health and sickness, age or youth, war or peace, it is, from the point of view of the spiritual life, mainly raw material to work with. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. So we see here in letter 19 that the demonic attitude towards love is that it would be heresy to them to admit that it exists. It's impossible to exist. There's no way that that much of a self-sacrificing love could really be there. They can't grasp that kind of actual sacrifice and love. God has to have some sort of mysterious or hidden agenda, because there's no way that that's really. And so to them, it doesn't matter if the humans are going to regard love as something that's good or bad, something that is amazing or detrimental, the same way that they don't care how we feel about war or peace. As long as we pick a side and we fight for it, as long as we're fighting for that thing instead of focusing on what's going on around us and the depth of spiritual reality that we have to deal with and contend with for eternity, then yeah, fine, they're cool. As long as we're distracted, they're happy. So I'm going to take just a couple moments here and I'm going to stop talking, and I'm going to let you guys ask questions in the chat and see what you want to dive into. I'm going to give this about a minute and a half. So if you have questions, start typing them now, and we will be back very, very shortly. All right, thank you guys. Moving forward, letter 20 in the Screwtape letters is all about sex, love, and marriage. As I talked about last week in youth, these are great things to talk about, but honestly, they're all very adult-centric. It's more about what to do when you're married and how to keep your marriage from being a distraction when you're trying to pursue God. So again, great topic. Read it on your own. If you don't have a copy of the book, I will gladly give you a copy. We still have some around, but for tonight we're going to skip that because you're not there yet. So letter 21, possessions and pride. So let's see what Screwtape has to say to coach a demon through our possessions and how to encourage ownership and pride in what has to be mine. My dear Wormwood, yes, a period of temptation is an excellent time for working in a secondary attack on the patient's peevishness. It may even be the main attack, so long as he thinks it's the secondary one. But here, as in everything else, the way must be prepared for your moral assault by darkening his intellect. Men are not angered by mere misfortune, but by misfortune conceived as injury. And the sense of injury depends on the feeling that a legitimate claim has been denied. The more claims of ownership on life, therefore, that your patient can be convinced to make, the more often he will feel injured and, as a result, ill-tempered. Now, you will have noticed that nothing throws him into an angry fit so easily as to find a tract of time which he reckoned on having all to himself unexpectedly taken from him. It is the unexpected visitor when he looked forward to a quiet evening, or the friend's talkative wife turning up when he looked forward to a tete-a-tete with the friend alone, that really throw him out of gear. Now he is not yet so uncharitable or slothful that these small demands on his courtesy are in and of themselves too much for it. They anger him because he regards his time as his own and feels that it is being stolen. You must therefore zealously guard in his mind the curious assumption, "My time is my own." Let him have the feeling that he starts each day as the lawful possessor of 24 hours. Let him angrily feel that portion of his property which he has to give over to his employers. And further, let him think of that portion which he allows to religious duties as a generous donation of his time. But what he must never be permitted to doubt is the total from which those deductions have been made was, in some mysterious sense, his own personal birthright. You have here a delicate task. The assumption of him owning time, which you want him to go on making, is so absurd that even if it is once questioned, even we cannot find a shred of argument in its defense. The man can neither make nor retain one moment of time. It all comes to him by pure gift. He might as well regard the sun and moon as his own cat and dog. He is also, in theory, committed in total service of the enemy, and if the enemy appeared to him in bodily form and demanded that total service for even one day, simply one 24-hour period, he would not refuse. He would be prepared to work hard for all 24 hours, again, if the enemy physically asked him to. Now, if he thinks about his assumption for even a moment, he's bound to realize that he is actually in this situation every day. The enemy has asked your patient for his life, and your patient has granted it. So when I speak of preserving the assumption of his time being his own in his mind, therefore, the last thing I mean for you to do is furnish him with arguments to defend the position. There aren't any. Your task is purely negative. Don't let his thoughts come anywhere near the subject at all. Wrap a darkness around it, and in the center of that darkness let his sense of ownership of time lie silent, uninspected, and operative. The sense of ownership in general is always to be encouraged. The humans are always putting up claims to ownership which sound equally funny in heaven and in hell, and we must keep them doing so. Much of the modern resistance to chastity comes from men's belief that they own their bodies, those vast and perilous estates of flesh, pulsating with the energy that made the worlds, bodies in which they find themselves without their consent, and from which they are ejected at death upon the pleasure of another. It's as if a spoiled royal prince whom his father has placed for love's sake in a titular command of some great province under the real rule of wise counselors should come to fancy that he himself owns the cities, the forests, and the corn, in the same way he owned the toys he played with as a child. All has been given to him for management, but they belong to their creator, their purchaser, and could be rightfully taken back if they are not used properly. Keep this from his mind. Let him pretend that he owns every moment. We produce this sense of ownership not only by pride, but by confusion. We teach them not to notice the different senses of the possessive pronoun, the finely graded differences that run between my boots and my dog, my server, my wife, my father, my master, my country, and my God. They can be taught to reduce all of these senses to the same as that of my boots, the simple my of ownership. Even in the nursery, a child can be taught that my teddy bear is not the imagined recipient of affection, for that's what the enemy would teach them if we are not careful. But instead it means the bear that I can pull to pieces if I like, because it is mine. In other words, we teach them that my means only something that they own, something over which they have complete control. We have taught men to say my God, in a sense not really very different from my boots, meaning the God on whom I have a claim for my distinguished services and whom I interpret my own meanings of from the pulpit, the God I have put in my toy box. And all the time, the joke is that the word mine, in its fully possessive sense, cannot be uttered by a human being about anything. In the long run, either our father or the enemy will say mine of each thing that exists, and specially of each man. The humans will find out in the end, never fear, to whom their time, their souls, and their bodies really belong. Certainly not to the humans themselves, whatever happens. At present, the enemy says mine of everything on the pedantic, legalistic ground that he made it, therefore it is his by nature. Our Father hopes in the end to say mine of things on the more realistic and dynamic ground of conquest, that it is his because it is won, and we are in the business of winning. Your affectionate uncle, Screwtape. That's a hard one. I mean it. That's hard, guys. From the beginning, talking about, the person is upset when they feel that their time has been taken away from them. I've told you before, I'm not perfect. I will freely admit that I still have learning and growing to do. My wife and I had a small argument about this very subject this morning because this is what I was guilty of. We're under quarantine. And we're not allowed to leave the house unless one of the necessary things is that church staff or clergy may go to work, may travel to work, and do work as long as it is related to the audio and visual transmission of services. So my entire plan for work was to come to church and to record these videos and put them all together and get ready to do a service for you tonight. And so she comes to me first thing this morning, and I'm just chilling. I'm reading a book. I'm waiting for coffee to hit. My day has barely started, and she's like, "So what's the plan for today?" I was like, "I don't have a plan. Like I need time to, and it became this whole thing where she needs to know how to schedule her day, and I have no idea what the day's like because I've not even started that yet. And when I start to feel that she is taking my time and making me schedule out my time and I have to give away all of my time, it's not my time. How annoyingly appropriate that this is the chapter that we read today, because it hurts. Everything is a gift. Absolutely every moment that we have. It could all be taken away in an instant. And sometimes has been. I mean, we see stories all the time. A plane crashes, a train derails. These things happen and time is ripped away from us inexorably, inexplicably, and we end. Time is a gift. And we spend it poorly. And we spend it being so concerned about what is ours, when none of it is. We are so prideful. We are so convinced that this more has to be mine. It's got to be. And it's not. It's not at all. And how chilling is it that in the end, everything will either be God's or Satan's. In the end, they will say mine of everything and everyone, including me, including you, including your mom, your dad, your cousin, your best friend. In the end of all things, they will be claimed by one side or the other. In the end of all things, they will go one place or another. What are you going to do about it? First, for you. Because the only thing that's really yours, is the decision. Will you accept his offer of life forever with him? Or will you spend this life and the next away from him? Will your mom? Will your dad? Will your cousin? Will your best friend? Will the nerd that you don't talk to? Will the popular person you're too afraid to talk to? Everyone has to make the choice, and everyone's choice is influenced by the people around them. What will you do? How will you live? For yourself? Or for something more? For someone more? I'm gonna wrap up, and I'm gonna leave the chat room open for a hot minute. Let's go with 30. It's not gonna take 30, but if it takes 10 and someone asks a really good question, I don't wanna cut it off too soon. So if you are live with me tonight and we're watching this together, let's talk. Ask questions, whatever you wanna do. I will be in the chat room for the next 30 minutes. And if this video has survived and been shared to you, hi, welcome, nice to meet you. And feel free to send me a message anytime. Thank you. I believe there's more for you. Let's talk about that.